We're the largest red county in the state.
Ooh. Them's might be fighting words for some people. Welcome back to the latest episode of A Better Conversation, a podcast put on by A Better Dallas. As always, I'm your host, Chris Clement, joined by the man, the myth, the legend, the mustache of North Texas, Mr. Kyle Mason.
Thank you so much. I'm so happy to be with you on this beautiful Tuesday evening. We got a bunch of really exciting stuff going on around the world, but really what we're going to focus in on is a county right here in DFW.
Well, exactly. The county we're going to be focusing on tonight is largely going to be Collin County because we are joined by our special guest, Mr. Shelby Williams, who he'll go through his biography, but was a longtime servant of the city of Plano on the city council. Also served as the Collin County GOP chairman and is now running for the Collin County Commissioner's Court.
That's right.
Shelby, thanks for joining us.
Thanks very much for having me.
Yeah. Well, if you wouldn't mind, for those in our audience that might not know you yet, would you give us a little bit of background on yourself?
Sure. Name is Shelby Williams, as you said. I just rolled off of Plano City Council after serving for 6 years. I was the former Texas State Director for Convention of States and former precinct chair for the Collin County Republican Party, and recently also rolled off as stepped down as Collin County Republican Party chairman. So I've been involved in the party for a while, but where I really found my groove was in municipal government and local government. I've been involved with the state legislature for about a decade now, but I absolutely loved what I did on city council, which is largely why I'm now pursuing a role with the county commissioner's court. It's pretty much the same thing as city council, just in a different function of government.
What is it about local government that sort of drew you to those sort of offices?
First, I like accomplishing things, and 2/3 or more of what impacts our day-to-day life happens at the local level. What happens in Washington gets most of the headlines, to a lesser degree what happens in Austin, but what really impacts our day-to-day lives happens at the local level. In fact, I do 3 free to the public classes, seminars. There's a Property Tax 101 after appraisals come out in the spring. There's a Constitution 101 that I do every year during Constitution Week in September, and I do a How Local Government Works in Texas. My very first intro slide to that seminar shows a photo in Portland, Oregon, next to Plano, Texas, both taken in June of 2020. And my point there is, and Portland is burning, and in Plano it shows our police chief, Ed Drain, walking in front of actual peaceful protesters, where nothing is on fire. And my point here is that nothing happened in either Portland or Plano to spark unrest. That all happened elsewhere. But 100% of the difference in whether a city burned or didn't was local government and the environment that it had fostered over years or decades and how it was run.
Well, you're talking end on it saying how it was run, the role that local government plays. What sort of role does the County Court of Commissioners play? Like running for commissioner, like why should people care about that?
It's interesting. There's a geographic overlap between the county government and the cities, at least where there are cities. There are a lot of portions of the county that are what is called unincorporated. That's outside of city limits. There's no city there. It's completely under county jurisdiction. But the county commissioner's court and county government is one of the least understood roles and functions of government in the state. County government, in a nutshell, is basically a local adjunct of state government, and it's with locally elected officials. One of the big deals about the commissioner's court and why people should care is because it's basically the intersection point between state and local government. So you got your cities, which in the commissioner's court precinct I'm running for, precinct 4, we have like 2 square inches of unincorporated area. It's the airport. And the rest of it is Plano, Dallas, and the Collin County portion of Dallas, and Allen. Not all of Allen, not all of Plano, not all of Dallas. But so outside of city limits, the county commissioner's court is responsible for county roads, infrastructure, etc. But the commissioner's court, one of the most interesting things about it is an adjunct to state government. I mean, responsible for things like the health department. County health functions, as everybody learned all of a sudden in 2020, are very different than any city health functions, which is mainly just health inspectors for restaurants. But the county health department is an extension of Texas Health and Human Services. It's managed at the county level. It's managed locally. We have 254 counties in Texas. But there are numerous other elected officials at the county level. There's the sheriff, there are constables, justices of the peace, the judges, tax assessor, collector. And none of them get to set their own budgets. None of them get to raise their own taxes or raise their own funds. There are some fees associated with some of these offices, but they have to come and get their funding from the commissioner's court. And so it's a really interesting nexus. The commissioner's court has to necessarily, because all these other county elected officials are coming seeking funding from the commissioner's court, you got to be able to have and maintain the relationships with those offices to have constructive budgetary discussions and funding discussions. And likewise, because unlike cities, especially home rule cities in Texas, counties don't get to make their own laws. Counties, like with the city of Plano, we can create our own ordinances as long as it's not prohibited by the state law or constitution or federal. We can do whatever we want, but subject to the approval of the voters ultimately. But at the county level, it's the opposite. We can only do what the state permits us to do. And so having strong relationships with the state government and legislators is likewise crucial. Now with Collin County specifically, we're the 6th largest county in the state. We're the largest red county in the state.
Oh, them might be fighting words for some people.
Oh, they have been for a while, but Terrence got some ground to recover. I hope they do. I genuinely hope they do. I hope we reclaim Tarrant, followed by Dallas, Bear, Travis, Harris. I hope every county goes red in Texas. But for right now, we are the largest red county in Texas, and I don't intend to lose it while I'm still kicking. In fact, as I said when I was Collin County Republican Party chair, I'm not interested in Collin County fighting the blue creep from Dallas. I'm interested in Dallas fighting the red creep from Collin.
Well, Dallas certainly needs it. We would love some red creep here in Dallas County. We have too many creeps, but no red creep.
Hey, did you know better conversations on social media? You can find us on Instagram, Facebook, and X. Following us will not only keep you up to date on our latest podcast drops, but will also keep you informed on current events around DFW, including election news, volunteer opportunities, and social events like late cleanups on Saturday mornings or our happy hours throughout the month where you can meet like-minded people in a fun social setting. You can also meet local politicians and activists that are our guest speakers. Follow the links below to connect.
So you kind of talked about, budget responsibilities, some of the limitations. There's certain issues that pop up, maybe hot issues right now for voters. What is something that a voter considering the county court of commissioners races, what are some of the things that they should be looking at?
A couple big things. First, I think everybody's heard of the proposal for Epic City now. It's proposed outside Josephine, outside city limits, so it's falling under county purview. That's probably going to be fully decided before I would ever take office, which would be in a year and a half. But it's on almost everybody's radar, and it is a big deal. Another thing is the fact that Collin County is one of the fastest growing counties in the entire country. And so as we've got about 1.2 million people in the county right now, as we approach eventual build out, it's going to take decades, then it's going to be really crucial, really crucial to provide for appropriate infrastructure and the two biggest deals nobody's talking about, water and energy. Because as we have this massive influx of people, not just to Texas, but especially North Texas, that's putting significant strain on our existing infrastructure as well as water and energy supply. We're we're hurting for water, and the pace at which we're producing water is not matching the increasing population and demand. Same with energy.
So that's, to me, that those two issues are fascinating in the sense that, like, on one hand, you have the sexiest possible political issue in Epic, right? Headline grabbing, gets everybody's attention. And then on the opposite end, you have the stuff that actually is going to impact your day-to-day life with water and energy that, you know, other than nerds like us, nobody's really talking about.
Right. It ain't sexy.
Yeah. So, but hey, let's, you know, sex sells. So let's start talking about Epic. You know, what we've talked about this on the podcast before. And, you know, from my perspective, this is a very interesting inflection point. I think for a lot of Republican legislatures who take their marching orders from property developers that for years and years and years have done everything they could to strip local control away from cities and counties. And they create an environment where something like Epic can occur because, I mean, the question I would say is, well, what can Collin County really do?
Right. And in the end, and I've heard a lot of things about Epic City, and it's hard to separate fact from fiction or speculation. I hear that there's prospective Fair Housing Act concerns, and I've also heard that they're navigating the law to get around that. It raises serious concerns. At the same time, I'm a strong adherent to the First Amendment. And so I think it's really crucial to strike a balance between recognizing and respecting First Amendment rights and prohibiting real violation of the law. And where we see this in all sorts of areas, where there is an avenue to clearly violate the spirit of the law, but stay within the letter, maybe you need to look at some law changes. But most laws are reactive.
So I have something, and I'm going to just admit this is kind of out of left field because this is not a county court of commissioner type of deal. One of Kyle's favorite aspects of living in North Texas is tollway authorities. And tollway authorities have this like quasi-governmental status. What is stopping us, or what my proposal would be, is to make HOAs abide by a similar quasi-governmental designation so that you have some of these First Amendment protections, especially as they relate to private property rights. Because some of the things that I saw, what purported to be an interview and an investor with Epic, where they talk about, we're going to use these HOA service fees to fund all of these like very Muslim things that Christians and Jewish people aren't going to want their money to go to. And this is how we're going to make sure it's open to everybody, but we're going to make sure they're not here. But if HOAs had to follow some sort of quasi-governmental thing, they wouldn't be able to do that.
I think that's reasonable. On the surface, I hadn't given it any consideration, but HOAs are
The devil.
yeah,
My opinion.
and are governed by some requirements. So there's already a legal basis for it. So it seems a reasonable argument that if it's falling under state law in some form or fashion to begin with, then what's good for the goose is good for the gander, and constitutional protections should apply.
Yeah, that's I mean, look, I don't like HOAs. I love the opportunity to legally go against them and to chip away at them. But so I guess, how would you describe, I mean, so I will have to say this is something that, there is rumored stuff about how you view the Epic development.
Sure.
Talking to voters that are out there that are watching this, that I'm sure in March of 2026 will be visiting the A Better Dallas YouTube page to watch this interview. What is your actual view on Epic?
So Epic is the largest mosque in the city of Plano, and there was a rare article that came out 2-3 months ago now, and I was on city council at the time, and because it was in, at least Epic City is not in Plano. Epic is in Plano. East Plano Islamic Center. That's what Epic stands for. And so because I was on city council, my phone blew up when this article hit. And it was misrepresentative. I'll just say that. There were legitimate concerns raised in the article and legitimate questions. The headline, I'm paraphrasing it here, was something like Plano mayor grants special access to radical Islamic mosque, highlighting the power that Epic Masjid wields in Texas.
Wow.
So I'm just going to skip to the punchline and say that was a total clickbait headline. I read the
Shocked.
I read the entire article. Okay, and I watched the video segment that it highlighted of a meeting, which was actually back in late 2022, that Plano Mayor John Munns and current County Commissioner Precinct 4 Duncan Webb were at Epic. And it was like a town hall style meeting with members of Epic. And that's not uncommon. We local elected officials go and speak to groups everywhere all the time. And in the 20 minutes or so of that video clip, the context, there were two questions really asked. One was a concern about ideological indoctrination of students in schools. And the second was about getting a sidewalk built to the mosque. They've been asking for that for years. That is squarely under the purview of city government, and so that's one that the mayor fielded. The bigger question on the part of the attendees was concern about ideological indoctrination, and they kind of danced all around saying LGBTQ without saying LGBTQ.
Yeah.
But they were concerned, and they said, the question framed it, again, I'm paraphrasing, something like, we want to ensure that we can pass on our values to our children. This got warped in the clickbait to say that they're trying to ensure radical Islamic indoctrination in schools. Okay. So making sure parents can pass along their values to their children became, indoctrinating radical Islam in schools. And I think all of us want to be able to pass our values along to our children. That's not unique to Islam or Christianity or Judaism or atheism or anybody else. So, but that's the bigger question. And
I think there's actually some people that were in the No Kings marches this last weekend that don't want to pass their values down to their children because that's colonizing the younger generation or something like that.
That is a good point.
We won't speak for them. We'll just say all sane people want to pass down stuff to their children.
Good distinction. Yeah. All sane people. And John Munns, Plano's mayor, he said a few times, because he's the mayor, he's not on the school board. Now, the author of this doesn't live in Texas and presumably doesn't understand the structure of education in Texas, public education. But he said 2 or 3 times, how about I come back here with a couple members of the school board and they can address these questions for you, which is fair. Now, he was on the school board for 16 years, but that's not his current function, so okay. I think a better headline for that article would have been Plano Mayor offers to invite school board members to address questions about school board.
I mean, I'd click on that.
That's going to rack up the clicks. Yeah. Obviously not, which is why that wasn't the headline. So because my phone was blowing up, phone and email, text and everything, like, what's going on here? I had to respond to it. It's not just mine, everybody on city council, but especially the mayors. But the central idea was that the Plano mayor was granting special access to school board. That's not a thing.
Right.
School board is as accessible or inaccessible as city council. It all depends on the council member. Like I was poll greeting in the recent local elections, and Nancy Humphrey, president of the school board, Plano School Board, was there poll greeting as well. Anybody could come ask her anything. about Epic, Epic City, anything else. Totally accessible. Requires no special access. It's like we keep the school board members locked away and we only bring them out for ambassadors and above. It's just not a thing.
Tasby could only dream.
Yeah. So it's frustrating because there are legitimate questions raised about Epic and Epic City, and related to fair housing, related to all sorts of things. And they're obfuscated. It prohibits an actual discussion about the real questions or issues when you're promulgating clickbait.
Yeah.
So it's real frustrating.
So, but I just wanted the clickbait aside, because that is frustrating. And the hard part about that is that people will clickbait and then they will twist rational responses to the clickbait.
Right.
Where it's like, yeah, that's not what it says here. Oh, you're covering for Epic or whatever they'll say.
Right.
But with regard to the implementation of Sharia law in a community in Collin County.
Yeah, and that's one of the biggest concerns.
What is your position on that?
That's a big no-no. No laws supersede or replace the local, state, and federal laws of Plano, Collin County, Texas, the United States. If you want to follow Sharia law in addition to the local, state, and federal laws, go for it. Kind of like an HOA. You know, HOAs don't replace local, state, and federal laws. They're just an added layer. If you want to do that voluntarily, go for it. Same with, Mosaic law. Same with the law of the Williams household. But no, the proponents or the concern about proponents of Sharia law supplanting other laws, that is a legitimate concern, and that's a no-go. Absolutely a no-go. And as I've said, all credible allegations of law breaking deserve to be investigated, and they are. Yeah. Multiple authorities have launched investigations, and I have full faith that if there is any actual law breaking, they'll uncover it. And if there are avenues that are clearly violating the spirit of the law while maintaining the letter of the law, then it's likely, I don't know if it's very likely, but likely that the legislature will take action. Or the county commissioner's court within what it's allowed by state government.
Do you have any position on potential additional authorities that the legislature could give the county to deal with something like this?
A lot of it, to your point earlier, would have to roll back previous preemption of local control. A lot of the local control was centered on cities, but it would have to, for unincorporated areas, and this might be kind of groundbreaking in order to give a county a level of control over unincorporated areas that counties previously haven't had in Texas. It might have to contemplate, the state legislature might have to contemplate extending to counties a level of the same ability that cities have for zoning, which it doesn't currently have.
Well, and you're a perfect person to talk about this and kind of help inform our audience. Like, that's one of the things we want to try to do here is give people more info. Would you talk a little bit about the difference between, as a city council member, the city of Plano, if they tried to build Epic inside the city of Plano as opposed to unincorporated county land, like what the differences in control there is there?
Sure. When you're inside city limits, the city has almost complete control over the zoning. So let's say, I don't know what Epic was zoned before they built it, but let's say it was zoned agriculture. They have to bring a request before the city staff and say, we want to change this to whatever the zoning is, commercial with religious institutions permitted. And then they have to bring forward the plans, the platting, the building plans to city staff. City staff has to work with them to button everything up. They come before the Planning and Zoning Commission. Planning and Zoning Commission looks at highest and best value of the land use, whether it conforms to the comprehensive plan. That's not a strict requirement, but try to make it that way. And consider the parameters of the rezoning request. Then, if it's approved by planning and zoning, then it comes before city council, who considers the same things and broader concerns, like is there already a mosque on every street corner next to every Starbucks? And then the city council gets to vote on whether to approve the zoning. If they do, then okay, you've got your rezoning, you can go ahead and begin your development. With the county, most of those layers don't exist. You can build mostly whatever you want. It depends on whether you're in an ETJ, extraterritorial jurisdiction, which extends for so many miles outside a city's limits, depending on that city's population. And there's not a lot the county can do to say no. Now, in terms of Epic, it's a mosque with several residential neighborhoods nearby in Plano and Richardson. And there are single-family homes, there are apartments, and all of those things are pretty much governed by local city zoning ordinances. And those can be different between Plano and Richardson, but the mosque itself is governed under City of Plano zoning. In outside city limits, whether it's an ETJ or just the pure wilderness of Collin County, then there's not a lot that can be done. It falls under state regulations, which is very little other than restricting what local government can do.
And so from a legal standpoint, just sort of understanding how Texas state law operates, all counties, all cities, any authority that they had flows from the state of Texas.
That's right.
And so there are actually statutes, the Texas Local Government Code, that specifically lays out what a city is and is not allowed to do with regard to zoning.
Yes, except that for a home rule city, so if you're a home rule city, I should say if you're not a home rule city, then it's kind of like a county. You can basically only do what state law allows.
Right.
If you are a home rule city, which Plano has been for many decades, then you can create your own city charter, which is basically the city's version of a constitution, and you can do whatever you want. You can make whatever laws you want, pass whatever charter amendments you want, as long as they're not prohibited by state law. Right. But at that point, the state law doesn't tell you what you, sometimes it tells you what you must do, but you have a lot more leeway, a lot more authority.
Right. So really, in either situation, the state law is not going to dictate what zoning or what your comprehensive map looks like, but there are the requirements that you perform. You have a comprehensive map, that there are certain procedures that you have to follow for zoning changes and all of that sort of stuff.
That's right. Yeah. And there are certain circumstances under which you have a comprehensive plan, like if you have like if you're going to go through the zoning process, Plano does, and Allen, McKinney, Frisco, most every city in Collin County, you have to have a comprehensive plan and a planning and zoning commission, and you have to have all those certain things in place. There are certain dependencies. But yeah, at the county level, you don't have any of that.
And for our audience that may not know really what a comprehensive plan is, what is that?
It's basically a multi-decade, in our case, roughly 30-year roadmap to growth and development in the city. Now, it's not ironclad, it's not completely binding, but under state law, you have to have it if you're going to go through the typical zoning process.
Why do cities care about comprehensive plans, if they do? I mean, I know you can go down to Houston, drop your kids off at the nursery and go next door to the strip club, but you can't really do that in Plano.
That's what, you just answered your own question, man. Okay. That's why. Just look at Houston. Houston does not really have zoning, and so you can, go to the strip club right next door after you drop your kids off at the daycare. Having a comprehensive plan allows you to take a multi-decade view as to how you want the city to grow. And Plano's case, we're built out already, but we have a lot of redevelopment coming up. And the comprehensive plan we had for many years, because there was forethought into it, helped guide the eventual build out of Plano. And then we had for several years the Plano Tomorrow plan, which was very controversial. And even though we were mostly built out, it's kind of what paved the way toward a lot of high density development. In Plano, interesting fact, Plano has the highest population density in Texas for a city with more than 250,000 people.
Oh, wow.
Higher than Dallas, even if you remove Love Field and the waterways from the landmass equation. But That was part of the reason I was elected back in 2019, was to pump the brakes on the high density development. And we started the process, and in 2021 passed a new comprehensive plan that had the overwhelming support of our people. And that's basically setting the vision for our growth and development, and particularly redevelopment, to about 2050.
And I'm sorry, I know we're supposed to be talking about your county court of commission seat, but you're such an expert on this sort of stuff that I really want to kind of help inform our audience about these sort of things.
Yeah, totally good.
Okay. So high density.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like it's often talked about in a very negative light without much explanation as to why anybody would care, which ends up having it just being labeled by those on the left as, oh, you're a racist.
Mm-hmm.
You don't want minorities or poor people living in your neighborhoods and your areas. Would you mind explaining with the actual, I guess, the reason that cities, the reason that communities care about the insertion of high density?
Sure. And there's really two, I'll call it 2.5 main reasons. One is impact on infrastructure. So we talked about that earlier in the county context. Collin County is growing really fast. We'd better make sure that we keep pace with our infrastructure to accommodate the eventual population. So the more people you have in an area, the more strain that puts on infrastructure and resources. Plano and Plano traffic is actually a great example, because when Plano was built out in bursts over the 80s and 90s, it didn't necessarily contemplate the world of today, and it didn't necessarily contemplate an almost 300,000 population that we have now. We're about 294,000. We'll soon be over 300,000, and we're probably going to absolutely cap out around 320. But we already have the highest population density. But you can tell that with our roads. They weren't built with that many people in mind. And then when you add all sorts of people traveling through Plano, whether north, south, east, west, there's a lot of extra people on the roads in Plano, and you can tell it with the traffic. I once sat through 6 cycles of the light, coming home from work, traveling eastbound on Spring Creek Parkway at Preston. No construction, no accidents, just Plano traffic. And that's a product of the infrastructure. So the more people, density, the more people you crowd into a place, the more strain that puts on infrastructure and resources. Resources is another thing. Energy and water, again, the two biggest issues nobody cares about, or nobody's talking about at least.
Right.
They care about it once it runs out. Once you turn on the tap and no water comes out, or you turn on the switch and there's no lights, you care about it a lot.
Panic.
Yeah, exactly. And with water, we had a real landmark case in Plano where we got a rate change with the North Texas Municipal Water District, because we have to contract with the water district to get our water, and then we're responsible for the last mile of that water's passage. But the contract we were locked into decades ago, eerily similar to DART. 13 member cities in both organizations, different member cities, except Plano, but eerily similar. We were locked into a rate structure with the North Texas Municipal Water District decades ago that put us, pun fully intended, underwater today. And it might have made sense back in the day, but things change, and it didn't contemplate the kinds of changes that effectively led to Plano subsidizing the rest of the water district. And it required, under state law, it required unanimous consent of the member cities of the water district in order to change the rate structure. Well, they're all benefiting from Plano's subsidization of their water. And so that was an uphill battle. And the powers that be within the water district at the time opposed changing that.
Right.
But so we started working with state government and the member cities individually, end running the North Texas Municipal Water District staff. And we ultimately arrived at a compromise that's going to recalibrate rates over a decade to establish equilibrium. And so don't even get me started on DART, but again, it's eerily similar.
I hope you didn't use any taxpayer-funded lobbyists to do that.
We actually did. We actually did. And that was...
That's not for tonight.
Yeah.
I will. The first. I think the first conversation that you and I had was on Facebook, taking opposite views on taxpayer-funded lobbying. I will definitely have you back on the podcast again in the future for us to talk about that.
I'd love
to.
I am opposed to taxpayer-funded lobbying, and I've never voted in favor of it. But that decision was made before I was elected.
Right. I'm in favor of it, but like I said, we'll talk about that another time. Sorry to digress. I just
No worries.
I'm getting on myself.
Yeah, but water's the other thing. I mean, the more people you crowd in, the greater their water needs. Same with energy, and so that's a real impact. Now, another impact that the more density you have, and this is particularly a function of rental versus ownership.
Okay.
So it's not strictly speaking density, but typically when you have a very dense city like Plano, there's a lot of rentals, multifamily specifically, apartments. Now, Plano is approaching about north of 40% apartments for all of our housing stock, and over 50% rentals when you include single-family rentals. And
I will be among that soon.
Yeah, and glad to have you. It shouldn't come as a surprise to nobody that renters, on average, don't put down the same roots in a community that owners do. Now, there are a variety of life stages, needs, and circumstances for which one might need to rent versus own. That's totally legit. And with the Plano Tomorrow plan, that's what I say, open the floodgates to high density development, meaning a lot of more multifamily. And if we had been at the time, maybe 15, 20% apartments, I don't think anybody would have cared. We were already north of 30, so it was already burgeoning. And now, once a lot of projects that have already been approved but aren't yet completed online are built, then we'll be about over 40% for multifamily. So that's, if you've got over 40 and especially over 50, including single family renters, and there are plenty of legitimate reasons by which somebody would need to rent. And so it's not, or it shouldn't be at least, anti-apartments or anti-renters. It's anti a certain proportion of rentals compared to ownership, because if you've got that many people, let's say more than half the people, or at least more than half the housing units, close to half the people in a city that are to varying degrees transient, they don't know if they're going to be here next year, they're not putting down the same roots. That destabilizes a community compared to what it would otherwise have if the overwhelming majority of people owned. And they're like, okay, I'm here for at least several years. And whatever the circumstances, whether you're just out of college and you may be accepting a new job across the country next year, then yeah, renting makes the most sense. And you probably don't want to rent a single family home and fill it with a bunch of stuff if you're going to be moving soon. But that matters. I mean, neighborhoods where people know each other, doesn't happen much anymore, but where people know each other, and broader communities where people know each other, that's kind of vital to the fabric of a safe, healthy, and vibrant community. And the greater the proportion you have of people who aren't going to stick around long and don't really have the vested interest, the same vested interest as people who plant their stake in the ground and say, this is where I'm retiring, or even this is where I'm going to be for a while. And I may retire in Florida, then that's to the detriment of the community fabric, which cascades into all sorts of other areas. Public safety, like if you know your neighbors, you're safer.
Right.
Just objectively speaking. If your neighbors know you, but if everybody's a stranger, then that presents a problem, because, hey, that's a dynamic in which criminals love to operate. Where they can blend in and nobody knows or cares what they're doing. But if somebody who's not me is poking around at my window, then my neighbors know.
Well, that's good. I mean, I appreciate that, because like I said, there's there's often the presentation of pushing back against housing density. It seems to have become such a political football, but there's not a whole lot of articulation as to why too much population density becomes a problem for a city or a community or anything along those lines.
Right. And I mentioned there are like 2.5 aspects. One of those, and this is a drum I've been banging in Plano for a while, when the density is focused almost exclusively on multifamily, the growth and development is focused on increasing density with multifamily. Not only do you have a higher proportion of rentals, but one of the reasons, not the reason, but one of the reasons housing costs are as high as they are in Plano is because we have a dichotomy of housing types. For anything that's newer than 50 years old, 90% of it is either large single-family homes or apartments. What we really lack are the smaller footprint ownership options. Starter homes, patio homes, single-family attached, townhomes, condos, etc. So as I mentioned, there are far more life stages and needs that we need to accommodate than just those two. People who have large single-family who need large single-family homes or apartments. What we've done, and part of the reason that Plano is aging in place, we have people who came to Plano to raise a family who are now empty nesters. They no longer need that 3,000 square foot house. They don't go upstairs anymore. They're empty nesters. They don't want to leave Plano or the immediate area because it's a great place. Why would they? They can't find anywhere to downsize into. Many of them, they're okay paying what their existing 3,000 square foot home is worth for a 1,500 square foot home or even smaller. They're okay not paying less.
Right.
They just want a smaller space that meets their needs better. They can't find it because it doesn't exist for the most part. And so what do? They don't move. They stay in place. That's why we just closed 4 schools in Plano ISD. We should have granted special access to the school board to some of the developers. But I digress. But they're staying in place and they are not freeing up that home to the next growing family. That creates artificial scarcity in the market. Laws of supply and demand kick in. Housing prices go up because supply has gone down artificially. So as we redevelop the city over the decades, and as Frisco's approaching build out, it's got like 13% left that's undeveloped. But as other areas like McKinney and going further north, Prosper, Salina, et cetera, as they grow, I really urge y'all to consider diversifying your housing stock so that you are catering to multiple life stages and needs, so that you've got that diversity of large single-family homes, small single-family homes, townhomes, condos, smaller footprint ownership options, rentals, etc., so that you don't find yourselves in that situation, because it's a whole lot harder to redevelop yourself out of that situation than to develop yourself out of it.
Well, what's something that a county could do to incentivize that?
It's limited. When you're building in the ETJs, which a lot are, like Salina and McKinney, there's not a lot that the county government can do to incentivize that, but that's where relationships come into play. And the county commissioner's court, there is interplay. Like right now, there's a big issue in Collin County regarding emergency services. Several cities have been subsidizing effectively fire service, like McKinney, have been in Princeton, subsidizing fire service to those outside the city. Now, this is an issue for a couple of reasons, and there's going to be a ballot referendum for the county for people who are outside of city limits, whether they want to fund through county taxes an emergency services district. That's a special district that's funded by tax dollars to basically provide fire service for people who don't live in these cities. So these cities have effectively been subsidizing those outside city limits, with some fee collection and everything, but they've been footing the bill, and the more people build outside city limits, the bigger the bill they're footing, and they don't want that anymore, which I totally get. Simultaneously, I've heard, I haven't driven it myself, but I've heard that it can take 25 minutes for some of these fire departments to reach somebody outside city limits. 25 minutes later, it's all
Right.
over.
Yeah.
You know, so
That's
totally
DPD response times.
so I totally get the need, but that's one of the interplays between county government and city government, and where we as the county government can work with the city government. I'm just going to fast forward and say we, but where we can work with city government is twofold. When you have situations like this where fire service is not meeting the current, let alone future needs of the county residents outside the city limits, leveraging those relationships and working with the cities to come up with a solution that works best and makes everybody whole, especially the person whose house is burning down. And simultaneously, with positions such as like on the COG, which splits between city officials, county officials.
And the COG being the Council of Governments.
That's right. Council of Governments, North Central Texas Council of Governments, and the Regional Transportation Commission. Just as an aside, my commissioner, Duncan Webb, who's not running for re-election, he's had a big focus on transportation. And if you know anything about the work I've done about DART reform, then that's a big focus of mine as well, talking as well as infrastructure, traffic, and everything. It's just kind of a natural follow-through. But Duncan has worked closely with numerous local elected officials to help effectively plan for the transportation needs of the county. In fact, the county's got about $1.1 billion in debt in bonds, largely focused on transportation, county roads, some city roads with a county share. The outer loop is a big deal, all sorts of transit concerns, especially as Collin County population expands explosively. And I digress a little there too, but it's important that county government, county officials and staff have effective working relationships with local government, because as cities have total purview as to whether they're going to build single-family, multifamily, single-family attached, whatever kind of housing they're going to build, to say, look, here are the macro needs of the county. Here's what I would advise. I want to hear your input as well about transportation and infrastructure needs at the county level, so we can work hand in hand to make sure that the county eventually builds out into a safe, healthy, vibrant, economically diverse area, because ultimately residents don't give a crap which city or county they're in.
Right.
You know, they have a diameter around their home, which is where they do the most stuff in. And I live in far west Plano, like spitting distance from the Denton County line. And I try to keep my shopping and everything within the city of Plano, because of sales tax. It accretes the value of the city of Plano. Kind of my responsibility as a city council member. But most people in the area, they don't care whether they're in the Colony or Louisville or Plano or Dallas or Frisco or Little Elm. They've just got this radius outside their home, which is really their purview. So we got to set boundaries somewhere, because that's where the local elected officials and the local government have their purview, but the residents don't care nearly as much as the elected officials. And so having those working relationships with mayors, city councils, city staff, city managers around the entire county and neighboring counties will help us ensure that as we approach build out, that we're promoting the best, safest, most vibrant community that we can. Long-winded answer.
Well, no, that's great. What I want to get to talk about water. You know, you talked about water, you talked about power. Before I did that, you know, Kyle is our resident real estate guru in the business. I'm really interested in kind of your thoughts on some of the stuff that Shelby was talking about as far as housing stock in Plano and multifamily, high density. You know, like how does that affect your world?
Yeah, and that's why I asked, like, what are some things that a county can do to incentivize those kind of entry level? You know, entry level in Plano used to be a Fox and Jacobs 3-2 that like you see at Custer and Alma or something like that, right? That's the first house I bought is in one of those neighborhoods. But now I mean, that's kind of almost out of reach for a lot of people. So now when I'm thinking about people getting bought into our system, you talk about planning routes and the follow-on effects that has in a neighborhood. You have a lot of people that just don't own anything anymore, and it
Right.
makes it more transient and it makes it less safe. So I'm just wondering, like, hey, if we can start building townhomes that could sell for 150, or you could start building more condos. You know, this is a condo. The HOA, I mean, it's just like there's a lot of drawbacks, but at the same time, you can get your foot in the door to actually home ownership and kind of live in something that is slowly appreciating. You're paying down the debt, etc. I mean, the density thing is really important because, like in Collin County, I mean, yeah, there's builders, but they're starting in the 400s
Right.
or something like that. And it's just like, unless it's a married couple and they're both, fairly established already in their career paths, there's really not, it doesn't really seem like a way forward for a lot of people.
Right. There's limited power the county government has there, but there are certain things apart from leveraging those relationships to, like, I think I come from a very good position to have those discussions with other local elected officials because I've dealt with this in Plano, and we are already built out. We are the most built out. We've already gone through the growing pains and the ramifications that other cities in Collin County have yet to face. So I can point to, and we've done a lot of things great in Plano, but in hindsight's 2020. But there are things that could have been done better.
Sure.
And I have the luxury of being able to tell other elected officials in other cities, here's what could have been done better in Plano. Here are some of the ramifications of some of our choices, like the dichotomy in housing types. I strongly advise that you just earmark some of this development, some of these lands for the townhomes, et cetera, make them more affordable, because it sounds great right now, and we did this back in the day in Plano, and other areas have done this as well, where you're going to make these real expensive single-family homes on a lot of acreage, and it's going to be great. Well, if that's all you got, then when the bills due, it turns out you have shortchanged yourself the ability to have a community that endures in perpetuity. And that's, just to take a little bit of a tangent, that's the same reason I promote economic diversification. Some people this is where I find local government particularly important. Some people take a very laissez-faire approach to government in general, local, state, or federal. Like, it's not the government's job to do all sorts of stuff. I feel very strongly, at least at the local level, that it's very important for local government to take a proactive approach to making sure that the future of that area is provided for as well as the present. And when it comes to economic development, economic diversification, I think it's important because you've got all sorts of people in the community who depend on the economy, whether for provisioning their needs or generating their livelihood. And if you've got too much concentration in a certain economic sector, like telecom, then that can have disastrous long-term consequences. You don't want to be the equivalent of a mining town where the mine dries up.
Right.
And okay, town's gone. So if you want to see to the long-term economic health and vibrancy of your community, then you've got to balance that against the needs of today, which is totally different than laissez-faire, and also necessitates zoning, by the way, Houston. But to your point, one of the things that county government can do is in public improvement districts. And there are economic incentives because the county is principally funded by property taxes, to a lesser degree by fees. There are property tax incentives that it can provide. So, as I think I mentioned earlier, I'm a proponent of eliminating property tax. That is a long road to hoe. That ain't going to happen anytime soon, and it has to be phased in. It has to be done carefully. That's a whole other podcast. But we've done this in Plano, and a lot of other cities do it. I am a proponent of property tax rebates. The reason is because, and we'll use Toyota as an example. I wasn't on council when this happened, but Toyota built a $350 million campus on a green field. They didn't take over an existing building. It was just a green field. So because they're taxed on the property, they're dramatically increasing the value of that property by building the whole campus on it. And I don't think they should be penalized by paying exorbitant property taxes, at least not all at once, on the value of that property when it doesn't necessitate nearly that much in cost of city services or school services or county services, a little bit. And so the property tax incentives are, okay, you build this $350 million campus here, and then you'll get a percentage of that back every year, or cut off, basically. So instead of paying, going from, I don't know what the actual numbers are, but let's say they would have gone from $1 million or $500,000 a year in property taxes for a green field. It was a choice green field, great location. So $500,000 in property tax to, $25 million in property tax the next year, when it's only going to cost maybe $1 million more in city services, traffic signalization, et cetera. That's just, it's punitive. And we should not punish people for improving their property. So my lament there is that that's not available to the little guy. Just big developments. In fact, one of the things I did on the city of Plano was push forward a program where we could offer a similar structure, a similar type of incentive for small businesses and homeowners who are going to improve their property, so that we're not disincentivizing it. If somebody's going to fix up their business, repave their parking lot, do whatever, they're not going to get punished for doing that when it doesn't cost the city anything. Right. And so what will ultimately result in increased property taxes that they have to pay, now they can get some of that back, and they're actually incentivized to keep up their property, improve it, and make the city nicer. So the county has some mechanisms, again, long-winded way of explaining that. The county has some mechanisms like public improvement districts and some incentives that it can do to incentivize certain developments and redevelopments within the boundaries of law. But that's ultimately necessary. I mean, nobody does anything without the proper incentives. So the county has a lot less leverage there than the cities do, but it's important in the eventual build out of Collin County.
When talking about some of the issues that voters should care about, you talked about water and power. Mm-hmm. What is it about water and power that Collin County voters should be thinking about with the upcoming Commissioner's Court election?
2021, Snowmageddon, Winter Storm Uri. So this was strange, unfortunate, tragic for a number of reasons. So anybody who lived here at the time remembers it. And
it's terrible.
Yeah. Many parts of the state were without power for a week. Now, my immediate focus was the city of Plano, and I was driving carefully through the city on sheets of ice, trying to find stores that were open to buy provisions to take to our warming stations. We had pop-up warming stations all over the city. Churches just opened their doors and said, okay, if we got power, bring in generators, whatever, because a lot of people just completely lost power to their entire neighborhoods. And it was kind of eerie driving through the city. There would be some areas with power, and you could just go through pitch blackness for blocks, no traffic lights, no nothing. Mm-hmm. And to compound that, I mean, power was lost. And, what we hear now is that we were minutes from losing the entire Texas grid.
Yeah.
That's a big deal because nobody knows how to do anything the old-fashioned way anymore. They were saying it wouldn't be back online for months. Mm-hmm. That's total civilizational collapse.
Right.
That's bashing one another's heads in with rocks on the street for food. Seriously.
Yeah. And
we are one well-placed EMP or just a super geomagnetic event from that happening. And FEMA FEMA's not going to save Texas in that situation. They may fiddle around the edge of the state. We've got way too much geography
Right.
to effectively cover. That's total martial law almost overnight if that happens. So yeah, the Texas power supply is that fragile. Joining the rest of the country's grid is not a solution because the same dynamic will apply if our grid structure is compromised. This wasn't public information at the time, we were this close to also losing the entire North Texas Municipal Water District. So compounding the loss of two critical things. They were ERCOT was about to shut off power to the central processing plant for the North Texas Municipal Water District that controlled distribution. And like there were emergency calls begging them, do not do this, stand down, don't. Can you imagine if just there's suddenly no water?
Right.
Yeah, that's how you get
Uncontrolled flow, like people's pipes were bursting anyway.
right.
And ice was accumulating on power lines and water infrastructure, compromising all of it, all at the same time. So these are the things you never know how critical they are until you lose them. And many people lost them that week. We lost power and temperatures inside people's homes plummeted. A lot of people had to huddle around their fireplace just for any semblance of warmth. A lot of people had to abandon their homes, especially if their pipes burst. It was horrible. Mm-hmm. And it was in the middle of a legislative session. Mm-hmm. So a lot of us were hopeful that something meaningful would be done. And yeah, there were some improvements, not nearly enough. And fellow councilwoman, now Mayor Pro Tem Maria too, had the real mic drop moment the following year. And in fact, I was on my way to serve on the Republican Party of Texas Legislative Priorities Committee in convention at the time when I started getting the warnings about controlled blackouts again in Plano. This is in May, June. And so there was too much strain on the grid again. And then we had our Encore representative before the city council a few weeks later asking him about this, like what was going on. And she said, like last year during Snowmageddon, a record freeze, I understand where you weren't prepared, but were we really not prepared for record heat in the summer in Texas?
Yeah.
And that is going to happen again. I mean, the winter freeze was called a 100-year storm. Turns out 100 years ain't that long.
Right.
So it's going to happen again, and we are not prepared. We're not producing the capability to create clean water and create energy to keep up with the influx of people and the influx of, or the increasing demand for it. Water is a fairly steady state demand. It's just driven by population. But our need for power with these things is not going down. Even if our population remains steady, our need for power is going up and we are not producing it. That's going to come with real California-style trade-offs unless we get serious about production and distribution of energy.
So from a county court commissioner's perspective, how can you have an effect on that?
That's also in juxtaposing state government with city government. So it's mainly the ability to influence with a little bit of ability to provide for infrastructure and contribution to infrastructure. So the main infrastructure at the county level is roads and bridges, and those are critical. But taking a macro view over the territory of Collin County and with neighboring counties, working with state and local officials to make sure that energy production is and water production is provided for. And in that area, so I say there's a pun coming, when we're responsible for roads and bridges, we're also responsible for building bridges between disparate elected officials.
Oh.
So there's the pun. So when
It
we've
is a play on words. Kind
yeah,
of.
when we've got a new water reservoir being built and it's not enough, it's not strictly a county function, but it is definitely helpful for county government, who already has relationships. By the way, slight plug for endorsements. I've already got relationships and many endorsements from numerous local elected officials, former elected officials, mayors around Collin County. So I've already got these relationships. And because county government has relationships with, or should have relationships with the councils, mayors, state reps, senators, and members of Congress everywhere, they're valuable connector points to get this federal elected official or agency talking to this local government and bridging the gaps when, Plano has a need that that McKinney is totally unaware of because they're not comparing those notes, but county governments are. It's as a connector point. There's very little that the county government itself can do to provide for power production distribution, unless we're going to build a nuclear power plant. Now, I'm not necessarily in favor of doing that in Collin County, a whole nuclear power plant. We've only got 2 in Texas. We need more. I am an increasing proponent of SMRs, small modular reactors, that can provide power to a city or two. And I think, nuclear power is the cleanest, most efficient form of energy production we have, and I think we need to expand that.
Except for Iran's program, it's awful. But
Oh yeah.
here in Texas, let's
Well, Collin County is enriching uranium at a pretty dramatic pace.
keep it under 4%.
Yeah.
So I want to sort of change topics.
We have 20 minutes.
Huh?
Yeah, 20 minutes.
Yeah. So you were, recently chair of the Collin County GOP. One of the things that we've talked about on this podcast a lot over the last 6 months now is just sort of the rancor that's been going on in the Republican political discourse. Republicans eating each other, basically. So I'm interested in what your perspective is as a recent county party chair and as a current candidate.
I ran for county chair principally on a platform of reaching, quote, the countless Republicans who don't yet know they're Republican. So a prerequisite to not yet knowing you're a Republican is that you're not currently a Republican. In my anecdotal experience in life, probably easily a quarter of Democrats are actually Republicans and don't know it.
Democrat voters.
Democrat voters, yes. I should say Democrat voters. And let's differentiate both Republican and Democrat activists, the activist class, from the average voter. Now, most people vote the way they vote because that's how their parents voted, that's how their peers vote, and they're generally uninformed about their own party. Again, that's Republican and Democrat. Now, but again, in my experience, is easily a quarter of Democrat voters whom I have met would actually be Republican if they understood the party platforms, understood what the elected officials of both parties do, vote for, etc. But when people are locked in the artificial dichotomy of red versus blue, then you're not going to reach them by leading with insults. And I've always advocated for I don't like the term big tent, and I said this on the campaign trail. I don't like the term big tent because it implies that you should shift your values to cater to more people. And I think that our values are our values. Those are the tent stakes. And by the way, I think they should be few. I think having a hundreds of party platform does a great disservice because everybody cares about something. Everybody's got their own pet project. If we make the Republican Party about all of those things, then it's a barrier to entry, and it's a barrier to getting anything real meaningful done. But I digress yet again. Our values, our core values, are the tent stakes. We can cast as much canvas over those stakes to accommodate anybody who wants to join those values. I've always invited people to share our values. And that's that's to the exclusion of 0 people. Anybody out there, it could be George Soros himself, if he wants to see the light and embrace conservative values, welcome. But you got to actually do it.
And start cutting checks.
Yeah, and start cutting checks. That's right.
You're George Soros.
Yeah. But you get the idea. And I've always said a couple of things. First, when it comes to government, we can argue about a lot of stuff. If you get at the root of it, in my experience, most of our disagreements amount to what do you believe is the proper role of government? Mm-hmm. And when you get at that, if you can get down to that question with almost anybody you're debating, you can bring them over to conservatism. Now, there are some people who are just diehard, the role of government is to help people.
Right.
And if they truly believe that, then you ain't going to move them off that position.
Right.
But you got to get to the actual root of the issue. But you boil all that away, I think 90% of all of our problems governmentally, policy debates, questions, disagreements, could be resolved if we treated one another as fellow children of God first and everything else second. Republican, Democrat, Aggie, Longhorn, whatever. And that pitting people against one another, and I've written about this, is a tactic that has been well understood and used by both tyrants and sports teams throughout history. And people generally fall for it. And I've been involved in politics real hardcore for about a decade now. And I always try to take an approach that moves the needle. And I mean, I did this on Plano City Council. I fulfilled all of my campaign promises, and there were some weighty ones, within 15 months of my first election. I had to move on to whole new promises. But I couldn't do that without moving the needle, and I couldn't move the needle without interacting with my fellow council members, whose votes I also needed, in a constructive way. And if I treat you with respect and dignity, I still may never convince you to my way of thinking.
Sure.
But if I lead with insults and denigration, I'm guaranteed never to convince you to my way of thinking, and I'm going to accomplish jack squat. So
You'll have sound bites.
yeah, I'll get clicks
Yep.
and shares, and I won't get anything done, and I will be a useless elected official. And so that's the approach I took on Plano City Council and as Collin County GOP chair. In the marketing that we did for our victory campaign for the November elections, which was the primary reason that I ran for GOP chair to begin with, is to shepherd us through those elections, which many of us felt were critical.
Slightly.
I never once, we, the county party, never once had a campaign of stick it to the Dems. I don't even think we mentioned the term Democrat or Democrats more than just a small handful of times.
Yeah. I remember one of the things that y'all did that I remember is make groceries affordable again.
Right. We came up with a holistic marketing campaign with 3 principal slogans: make groceries affordable again, make the border secure again, and make our kids safe again. And we tied those themes together, but those are policy focused. And it doesn't take a rocket scientist to understand that the antithesis of those was the Democrat Party, the party in power federally. But that was issue focused. And it, by extension, invited anybody who was a Democrat to join us. If our campaign slogans were stick it to the Dems or any equivalent thereof, we've instantly said, you may agree with us to any Democrat voters. You may agree with us on issues. You're not welcome. Go away. And you're guaranteed not to grow the party that way. And we achieved the highest in Collin County. We had the highest voter turnout out of the 12 largest counties in the state. And we got redder doing it.
Wow.
And we reached many of the countless Republicans who didn't yet know they were Republican. And we've started to chip away at others using that approach.
So smart. I mean, you got one side that's more combative and more insulting, and you're taking this tact and opening up the door for thousands, possibly millions of people to join the party. I mean, it's brilliant, and every county that's not doing that is just missing a massive opportunity.
Yeah.
Well, and it worked in the sense we felt it in Dallas because of the Fifth Court of Appeals.
Right.
Right. I mean, the Fifth Court of
yes.
Appeals, for those of you who don't know, is based in Dallas, but there's actually 6 counties that it handles appeals for, and that voters cast votes in. Collin County being one of them, and Collin County ate up a big chunk of the deficit, Dem to Republican, that was created in Dallas County that allowed us to flip 7 out of those 8 seats.
Right. And had it not been for that, they wouldn't have flipped.
Right, because a lot of those races were very, very close. Well, so how would you juxtapose that position that was taken in November and that worked so well to what we're seeing out of the party and party leadership now?
The rhetoric is counterproductive. It's just flat out counterproductive. It may work to get clicks or rally the faithful, but they're already faithful. We, the Republican Party, are literally dying out, because we're not attracting younger voters. We are not bringing them along. We're not cultivating them. And in fact, in many cases, we're alienating them. When the messaging is stick it to the Dems, or even more counterproductively, stick it to the rhinos, then whether somebody's liberal or conservative, I'm not going to say Democrat or Republican at this point, it's a turnoff. And if they're already comfortable in their worldview, like I am a liberal and I know I'm a liberal, nobody's speaking to them to try to invite them to embrace conservative values. And so they're not even going to consider it. The only way, the one and only way you will invite somebody to consider embracing conservatism, and I'm not even going to say republicanism there, there's strong overlap if you draw a Venn diagram, but the conservative and Republican are not necessarily the same thing, is by getting them to actually listen to a message, whether that's a soundbite or a podcast. If they are unwilling to listen, maybe because you've been insulting them for years, then they're never going to come over. And I said when I was sworn in as Collin County Republican Party chair, there are 2 Democrats I particularly admire and respect. Maybe you've heard of them, Ronald Reagan and Donald Trump.
Yep.
And we prevent the next Ronald Reagan or Donald Trump at our own peril. So,
Or Rick Perry.
yeah.
Right? I mean, I think a lot of people in Texas forget that Rick Perry was like Al Gore's campaign guy in Texas when
Right.
Al Gore ran for president back in the 80s.
Great point.
So, well, okay. I think logically I understand where you're coming from. You know, it's not an effective tool, but how do you respond to the arguments that, well, we're not getting Republican results from what we're doing. And we have too many people that are down in Austin or are up in Washington that will tell us one thing and then they won't actually go and vote that way. And we have to find some way to hold them accountable.
I think that's totally fair. The question is, what do you actually do about it, and what is actually going to make the difference? So we had this a lot within the Collin County Republican Party, and I know it's in many other counties. It's not unique to Collin County. How do you strike the balance between holding elected officials accountable to do what they said they would do and promoting the values of the party while also winning elections and holding seats? Now, I don't subscribe to the theory that you hear from many elected officials, well, I can't fulfill my campaign promises. I have to shift because I have to get elected or reelected or re-reelected, et cetera, in order to do anything. And then, well, I can't do anything because I got to get reelected. It's a policy stalemate. I reject that. I think be careful what you say you're going to do and then advance it. I would rather fight for every yard going down the field than forfeit the whole game. And that's where
That's a good analogy.
That's where people who try to apply the purity tests, like somebody's in office, okay? Well, they're only doing 80% of what I want. Well, I'm a big proponent of the Reagan principle. The person who agrees with you 80% of the time is a friend and an ally, not a 20% traitor. There are a lot of folks in the Republican Party and Democrat Party who have lost sight of that or never had sight of it. It's, you do everything I want or you're a traitor. And whether that's 80% or 90% or 50%, the question is, are you moving the needle? And do you have an approach that might move the needle more? Because like it or not, and I don't like it, there were only two viable political parties. And there are approaching 30 million people in Texas.
Right.
And if you insist on absolute purity and get everybody else out of the party that does not adhere to everything we believe, then your party is going to lose power. There's already a party like that. It's the Libertarian Party. I have a lot of little L libertarian leanings. The Libertarian Party doesn't accomplish anything. They don't win elections. They don't move policy. They don't get anything done. So what's more important, actually moving the needle or proclaiming your ideological purity? The two cannot coexist.
That's a great question. Like I said, I really like that football analogy you had about moving it a yard or forfeiting the game. Well, you've got dad duties, right? You're a good father. You're going to do some dad duties. So, we're coming to our closer segment here with you. But before you go, I did want to give you an opportunity to tell voters what do they need to know about your campaign? How can they learn more about your campaign? What do you want to offer on that front?
Well, thank you very much. So, again, the office I'm running for is Collin County Commissioner, Precinct 4. This is most of Plano, west of 75, West Allen with a sliver of East Allen, and the Collin County portion of Dallas, North Dallas. So I have 6 years on Plano City Council, served as Collin County Republican Party chair almost a year. I caught some flack for this. I didn't even want to be county chair to begin with. I was willing to run for it to shepherd us through the 2024 elections and to help try to change the tone in county politics. So we were focused more on moving the football down the field than on throwing it out of bounds or anything else that didn't actually advance the football. And I'm running in the Republican primary election, which is going to be March 3rd of next year, 2026, and then on to the general election against whomever the Democrat is in November of 2026. You can find out all the information you like about me at shelbyhwilliams.com, shelbyhwilliams.com. That H is really important, otherwise you're going to get Shelby Williams Furniture Company out of Tennessee, which has nothing to do with me. But although they were very gracious to me in my campaigns to discontinue their digital ads on Google during my elections because they were eating my lunch in advertising because it's a competitive bid system. But I digress again. Like I said, I fulfilled all of my campaign promises for Plano City Council in 15 months after I was first elected. I have moved the needle considerably in Plano. I intend to do the exact same thing in Collin County. I'm a budget nerd, I'm a policy nerd, and a transportation nerd. Transportation, in addition to water and power provisioning and infrastructure, is one of the critical needs we're going to have as we approach build-out. Anybody who's driven on 380 can attest to this firsthand.
Well, I think you definitely proved your policy nerdiness with the detail of some of your answers to the questions. But I appreciate you joining us, Shelby. Thanks for joining A Better Conversation, sharing your wisdom, and check out his campaign, check him out as a candidate, fully inform yourself, and like I said, vote for people that you like. Don't vote against people that you don't like. But thanks for joining us, Shelby.
Thanks so much, Chris. Thank you, Kyle.
Yep.
Appreciate it.